"Hey, I'm talking to you. What's the matter? You don't get scared." The man's voice, reeking of stale beer and arrogance, cut through the blaring rock music. Emily didn't pause. She placed 4 foaming amber beers on the rough-hewn wooden table with a cold precision, not a single drop spilling over. "Here you go," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Her eyes were fixed on the table, not on the hulking biker blocking her path. The man scoffed. A nasty sound. He was tall, his face nearly hidden by a thick beard, his arms a canvas of distorted, monstrous tattoos. "That's it. I'm talking to you, not the damn table," he growled, deliberately leaning in, invading her space. "I know your type. Always looking down, always trying to be invisible. But you know what, sweetheart?" He paused, waiting for a reaction she wouldn't give. Her silence was the torch that lit the powder keg of his ego. "You think you're tough," he roared, his hand tightening, crushing the fabric of her t-shirt as he violently yanked her toward him. The tray of beers in her hand tilted but didn't fall. The space between them vanished, so close she could smell the sour beer and sweat on him. His hot breath washed over her face. "I said, are you listening to me?" he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "What? Are you deaf or something? Or do you just think you're too good to answer a guy like me?" But Emily didn't flinch. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For the first time all night, she slowly lifted her eyes. Her gaze held no fear, no defiance, only a coldness as deep as a frozen lake. It bored directly into his, and for a split second, the biker felt as if he'd been stripped bare, as if this small woman could see right through him to every insecurity, every weakness he hid behind his tattoos and muscles. The rock music seemed to fade. The laughter died. Every eye in the bar was now fixed on them, forming a silent, suffocating circle. In front of everyone, her silence was a humiliation deeper than any insult. He had lost this battle of wills, and in a loser's rage, he was left with only one option: destruction. "You want to be silent," he hissed, his anger twisting into pure malice. "Then let's show everyone what's hiding under that tough act." With a furious roar, he grabbed the collar of her shirt with both hands. Emily didn't resist. She just stood there, solid as a rock, and that was the ultimate act of defiance. A sharp, dry RIEP tore through the bar's heavy silence. The sound was cleaner and more shocking than shattering glass. Emily's white t-shirt was ripped open from the neck down, exposing her chest. A few gasps erupted from the crowd. Everyone held their breath. They expected weakness, shame, tears. They expected the small waitress to frantically cover herself, to crumple in humiliation. But that's not what they saw. Instead of delicate, bare skin, what they saw was an unmistakable image etched into the skin over her sternum. A spread-winged eagle, a globe, and an anchor. The eagle, globe, and anchor. The emblem of the United States Marine Corps. It rested there, proud and immovable, a symbol of honor and steel discipline in a place of chaos and lawlessness. The tear in her shirt was no longer a mark of shame. It was a frame, unintentionally glorifying a truth that had been hidden for too long. The biker, Jax, froze. The sneer on his face hardened. He didn't understand at first, seeing only a complex tattoo. But something about that proud eagle made his blood run cold. The silence was broken by a gravelly voice from the bar. It was Old Man Frank, an old vet who always drank alone. "Good God," he muttered, just loud enough for the bartender to hear. "That's a Marine Corps emblem." The words Marine Corps rippled through the room like a stone tossed into a still pond, spreading in urgent whispers. "She's a Marine?" "No way." Jax heard them. His eyes went wide. The confusion on his face curdled into pure fear. He looked back at the tattoo, then at Emily's impassive face. He got it now. He hadn't just hassled a waitress. He stammered, his booming voice suddenly weak. "I didn't know." One of his friends, a guy with a snake tattoo on his neck, stepped forward and grabbed Jax's elbow. "Shut up and let's go, Jax." the friend hissed, his voice filled with anger and embarrassment. Now, he pulled Jack's back hard. Jack stumbled, his gaze still locked on Emily as if he couldn't process what he'd done. No one in the bar was laughing anymore. A few bikers stared at the floor. Other patrons shook their heads in disgust. The initial silence was replaced by a low murmur of judgment, all of it aimed at Jack's. In the stunned silence of the bar, Emily didn't watch the bikers retreat. She just calmly raised a hand and pulled the torn edges of her shirt together, covering the tattoo. Then, she looked down at the tray of beers, still perfectly intact. She walked over to the table where 4 men sat frozen like statues and gently set down each glass. "Here you go," she said, her voice as steady as ever. One of them stammered, Thanks." He couldn't meet her eyes, staring intently at his beer instead. "You're welcome," Emily replied and turned away. By the door, Jax and his crew were making the most humiliating exit of their lives. No one said a word. The heavy clomp of their boots on the wooden floor was the only sound. Jax couldn't bring himself to look up. He could feel dozens of eyes boring into his back, not with fear, but with contempt. The bar door slammed shut behind them, cutting the tension. Instantly, the atmosphere in the bar shifted. A low buzz of conversation started, quiet at first, but spreading through the room. "Is she okay?" someone asked the bartender. "I think she's more okay than all of us put together," the bartender answered, his eyes following Emily with a whole new level of respect. Emily went back to work. She cleared empty glasses, wiped up a beer spill, and moved between the tables. But everything was different. No one whistled or catcalled. No one dared to stare for too long. They'd look at her, then quickly look away if she glanced back. She was no longer the invisible waitress. Now, she was a mystery. That night, the story began to escape the 4 walls of the bar. Old man Frank went home and told his wife. The bartender called his brother. A few regulars went to another bar, and their story was the most exciting thing anyone had heard all night. "You're not gonna believe what just happened at the Rusty Mug." By the next morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. The milkman heard it from a customer. The cashier at the grocery store heard it while scanning items. It spread from house to house, from mouth to ear. This small town didn't have much to talk about, and the story of the waitress who was a Marine became a legend overnight. Emily didn't know it yet, but the peace she had fought so hard to find was gone for good. Just 2 days later, the Rusty Mug had changed. The familiar faces, the mechanics and construction workers, were still there, but scattered among them were total strangers. A clean-cut middle-aged couple, a group of curious college kids. There was even a mother with her teenage son. They hadn't come for beer or rock music. They had come to watch. They'd order a soda, then just sit there, their eyes constantly searching. And when Emily emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray, a strange hush would fall over their tables. They'd nudge each other, whispering, "That's her." Emily pretended not to notice. She kept her eyes forward, focused on her work, but she could feel their gazes, prying and curious, like dozens of tiny spotlights on her. "Excuse me, are you Emily?" a woman asked as she set a glass down. "Yes," Emily replied curtly. "We heard your story. It's so amazing. Where did you serve?" "I just work here, ma'am," Emily said, deliberately misunderstanding the question before quickly moving away. But they didn't give up. Another man blocked her path as she walked by. "The story is you weren't even scared. Is that true? Were you in real combat?" Emily's grip tightened on the tray. "Can I get you something, sir?" "Oh, no, I just wanted to know," the man said, oblivious to her discomfort. "You must have been through a lot. Those scars. How do you get over something like that?" The question hit her like a punch. Those scars. He spoke about them so casually, as if they were just some barroom anecdote. He knew nothing of the sleepless nights, of the memories she fought to push down every single day. Her past, her pain, had now become a sideshow for strangers. She felt suffocated. This bar had been her sanctuary, a place where she could be invisible and earn a quiet living. Now, it had turned into a glass cage. Every question, every curious glance, was another iron bar closing in around her. She wasn't a hero, she was just someone trying to forget, and all they were doing was forcing her to remember. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. A man in a suit who looked completely out of place had been waiting in a corner booth since the bar opened. He had the look of a reporter, with a notepad and a practiced, professional smile. When Emily brought him his coffee, he launched right in. "Miss Emily," he said, his tone overly familiar. "I'm from a major newspaper. Your story is incredibly inspiring. A silent hero in an ordinary town. We want to put it on the front page." Emily just set the coffee down. "I don't have a story." "Oh, don't be so modest," he chuckled. "People want to know. They want to know about your bravery, about the sacrifices you made for this country. We can pay you, of course, a handsome sum." "Pay me?" Emily repeated, and for the first time, her voice carried emotion, a chilling coldness. "You want to pay me to relive the worst days of my life?" The reporter's smile vanished. "I am not a story," Emily continued, looking him dead in the eye. "My memories are not for sale, and my past is not your entertainment." She turned and walked away, leaving the man stunned. She went straight behind the bar where her boss, a kind man named Sal, was polishing glasses. "Sal," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What is it?" "Emily, that guy bothering you? I'll throw him out." "No need," she said, slowly untying her stained apron and placing it on the counter. "I quit. Tonight's my last shift." Sal stopped polishing. He looked at her, his expression sad but not surprised. He'd seen what she'd been putting up with all week. "You sure, kid?" Emily nodded. "I can't be here anymore, this place. It's not for me now." She looked out at the bar, at the strange faces watching her. They didn't see her. They saw an image, a legend they had created. They had taken her invisibility, and with it, the peace she had worked so hard to find. That night, after turning in her uniform and collecting her final pay, Emily went back to her small apartment. She didn't own much. Within an hour, everything she had was packed into a large duffel bag. She didn't look back. She walked out of town under the dim streetlights, searching for a place where no one knew her name, and more importantly, where no one knew her story. The new city had no name for Emily. It was simply somewhere else, a place big enough to get lost in, anonymous enough that her past couldn't find her. She stepped off the bus with her single duffel bag over her shoulder, and the city's anonymity welcomed her like an embrace. She rented a small room above a laundromat, where the gentle, rhythmic hum of the machines at night became a comforting sound, drowning out the loud memories. She didn't look for work in a bar. No more late nights, no more blaring music or drunks. Instead, she found a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street. It was called The Daily Grind, with simple wooden tables and the rich aroma of roasting coffee beans. The work was simple: make coffee, toast croissants, wipe down counters. The customers were hurried office workers in the morning and old men reading newspapers in the afternoon. They ordered, paid, nodded thanks, and left. No one lingered to ask questions. No one looked at her for too long. Here, she wore a clean brown apron that covered most of her torso. She tied her hair back neatly, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like a ghost again. A welcome ghost. She was the girl at the coffee shop, nothing more, nothing less. She learned to smile, a soft, professional smile for the customers. She learned the regulars' orders. Mr. Miller liked his coffee black, no sugar. Miss Davis always got an oat milk latte. Her life was filled with small, meaningless details. The whir of the coffee grinder, the jingle of the bell on the door, the rustle of a newspaper page turning. These quiet sounds began to fill the empty spaces inside her, pushing the screams and gunshots of her past a little further away. She wasn't happy, not yet. but she had peace. And for Emily, that was a good enough start. She thought she could live like this forever. That peace lasted for almost a month, until the man appeared. He was a new regular, always coming in at 7:15 a.m., ordering a black coffee and sitting at the corner table. He was tall, quiet, and had eyes that seemed to see everything. Emily didn't pay him much mind, until one morning when a new employee dropped a tray of ceramic mugs. The loud, sudden crash made the whole cafe jump. But Emily was different. She didn't jump, she froze. For a split second, her entire body went rigid, her sharp eyes instantly scanning toward the sound, assessing the threat. A trained reflex. The next day, when he came to the counter to order, he looked directly at her and said, his voice low and calm, "Army, Afghanistan." Emily stood motionless, a coffee filter in her hand. She didn't understand. He gave a slight nod. "That was me, the way you reacted yesterday. I recognized it. Only people who've been there have that reflex." He didn't ask who she was, where she'd been, or what she'd done. He simply recognized her, shared a piece of himself, and built a bridge. For the first time since leaving her old town, Emily felt her armor had been pierced. But strangely, she didn't feel fear, only a quiet sense of surprise. A week later, after days of serving him coffee in silence, she was the one who spoke as she brought the cup to his table. "How do you make it stop?" she asked quietly, a question she'd never dared to ask anyone. He looked up, his eyes holding no pity, only understanding. "You don't," he said simply, "but you can learn to live with it. Running only makes the voices in your head louder." His name was Jake. He didn't ask any more about Emily's past, and she didn't ask about his. A week later, instead of leaving right after his coffee, Jake lingered. He placed a small business card on the table as Emily came to clear it. "It's not a shrink or anything like that," he said, his voice still calm. "It's just a group of people. We meet on Tuesday nights. We drink terrible coffee and tell worse stories. No judgment, no expectations. You can just come and listen if you want." Emily looked at the card. It just had an address and the simple words, "Beacon Veterans Support Group." She didn't go that Tuesday, or the Tuesday after. The thought of sitting in a room and talking about the past terrified her. Running had become her instinct. But Jake's words echoed in her head. Running only makes the voices in your head louder. And he was right. The sleepless nights were getting worse. Finally, on a damp Tuesday evening, she found herself standing in front of an old community center, the address from the card. She stood there for 10 minutes, at war with herself, ready to turn and walk away. But then she took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room inside was nothing special. A few folding chairs set in a circle, a coffee pot in the corner, and about 8 people sitting around. Old, young, men, women. Jake was there. He saw her, gave a slight nod, and pointed to an empty chair. No loud greetings, no special attention. She sat down and remained silent for the entire meeting. She just listened. One man talked about how he couldn't sleep during thunderstorms. A young woman talked about her sudden flashes of anger. They talked about nightmares, about feeling alone in a crowd, about the struggle of trying to explain things to family that only they could understand. They were talking about her. For the first time, Emily didn't feel alone. She wasn't the only one carrying these invisible burdens. When the meeting ended, she still hadn't said a word. But as she stood up to leave, she felt a small sense of relief wash over her. 3 weeks later, in that circle of broken people, Emily finally spoke. "I was in Fallujah," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "And there was this one day. No one interrupted. No one looked shocked. They just listened, with patience and understanding. And as she spoke, the tears she had held back for years finally began to fall. It was the first Tuesday of many. Each week, she shared a little more. Every story she told didn't make the pain disappear, but it robbed the pain of its power. It was no longer a monster hiding in the dark, but an old scar brought into the light. She realized that the bravest soldiers weren't the ones who felt no fear, but the ones who faced it every single day. Courage, she learned, wasn't the sound of gunfire on the battlefield. Courage was sitting in a quiet room and admitting you weren't okay. Strength wasn't hiding a tattoo under a shirt, but accepting it as a part of who she was, a chapter in her book, no matter how painful that chapter might be. The change didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Her smile at the coffee shop started to reach her eyes. She no longer stood with her back against the wall. Sometimes, she even started a small conversation herself. A few months later, on a bright, sunny morning, Emily was wiping down the counter at the coffee shop. Jake came in, as usual, and ordered a black coffee. They made small talk about the weather, about a new movie, a normal, easy conversation. As she handed a coffee to another customer, her sleeve slid up her arm slightly, revealing a small piece of an eagle on her forearm, another, smaller tattoo she'd had for years. She noticed, but she didn't rush to pull the sleeve down. She just let it be. It was no longer a shameful secret or a shocking symbol. It was just a part of her. Emily was no longer the waitress with the torn shirt. She wasn't the reluctant hero of a small town. She was just Emily, a woman making coffee, a friend, a survivor. She had found strength not in proving herself to others, but in forgiving and accepting herself. Her story was no longer defined by that violent moment in the bar. That moment was now just the starting point, the necessary shock that had pushed her onto a longer, harder journey, but one that ultimately led to freedom. A journey of healing, of quiet courage, and of finding peace within her own scars.